Imagine a world where the curve of your neckline could sentence you to public flogging, where the length of your sleeves determined your worthiness for marriage, where the color of your stockings could brand you a heretic or a whore, and where every thread you wore upon your body was scrutinized not for beauty or comfort, but as evidence of your moral character, political loyalty, and sexual availability to a society that had weaponized fashion into the most intimate form of surveillance and control ever devised by human authority. This was not the realm of totalitarian fantasy, but the daily reality of centuries of European life, where dress codes penetrated deeper than skin to regulate the very essence of human desire, transforming clothing from personal expression into a comprehensive system of social messaging that could elevate or destroy lives with the precision of a court verdict and the permanence of a brand burned into flesh. From the gilded courts of Renaissance, princes to the stone-walled convents of medieval nuns, from the bustling guild halls of merchant cities to the humble cottages of agricultural villages, authorities crafted elaborate sartorial laws that transformed every garment into a declaration of status, every accessory into a confession of intent, and every choice of fabric or color into a statement of submission or rebellion that could be read by any observer trained in the deadly grammar of regulated desire. These were not merely fashion restrictions or sumptuary laws designed to maintain social hierarchy, but comprehensive systems of erotic control that recognized clothing as the most powerful language of human attraction and sought to regulate sexual desire itself by controlling the visual signals that sparked arousal, communicated availability, and channeled the dangerous energies of human sexuality into forms that served the political and economic interests of those who claimed the right to govern not only public behavior, but the most private impulses of the human heart. The sumptuary laws of medieval Europe created the foundational architecture of sartorial surveillance, establishing legal frameworks that transformed clothing from personal choice into political statement, while creating elaborate taxonomies of forbidden and permitted garments that served to maintain rigid social hierarchies through the systematic regulation of visual desire and status display. These laws typically prohibited certain fabrics, colors, ornaments, and styles to specific social classes, creating comprehensive systems where clothing became a form of identification that could be read by any observer to determine an individual's legal status, economic position, and social privileges or restrictions. The famous Estatuto de los Judíos in medieval Spain required Jewish citizens to wear distinctive clothing, including yellow badges, pointed hats, and specifically colored garments that immediately identified their religious status, while making them targets for discrimination, violence, and economic exploitation by marking them as permanent outsiders whose very appearance testified to their social vulnerability. Women faced particularly invasive dress regulations that controlled necklines, sleeve length, skirt dimensions, and undergarment visibility in ways that transformed female clothing into a comprehensive system for regulating sexual desire and controlling male access to visual stimulation that might distract from religious devotion or political submission. The enforcement of sumptuary laws required elaborate inspection systems where officials examined citizens' clothing in public spaces, private homes, and religious gatherings to identify violations that could result in fines, public humiliation, confiscation of illegal garments, and in extreme cases imprisonment or corporal punishment for persistent violators. The laws created impossible double binds, where individuals were required to dress appropriately for their social status while being prohibited from wearing clothing that might suggest upward mobility, sexual availability, or political independence, ensuring that perfect compliance was virtually impossible, while providing authorities with flexible tools for selective enforcement against political enemies or social undesirables. Wealthy merchants and rising middle classes faced particular scrutiny under sumptuary laws that were designed to prevent their economic success from translating into social recognition or political influence by prohibiting them from wearing garments associated with nobility, while simultaneously requiring them to dress in ways that acknowledged their subordinate status. The religious dress codes imposed by church authorities created comprehensive systems for controlling sexual desire through the regulation of clerical, monastic, and lay clothing that transformed religious devotion into a performance of sartorial submission, while using garment regulations to maintain ecclesiastical authority over both spiritual and temporal aspects of human experience. Monastic rules included detailed provisions governing the fabric, color, cut, and ornamentation of religious habits, creating systems where every aspect of clerical appearance was regulated to prevent distraction from spiritual duties while reinforcing hierarchical relationships within religious communities. The Cistercian reform movement developed particularly strict dress codes that prohibited dyed fabrics, ornamental stitching, and fitted garments in favor of rough, undyed wool habits that were designed to eliminate visual appeal and sexual attraction while demonstrating rejection of worldly vanity and submission to spiritual authority. Female religious communities faced especially invasive dress regulations that controlled undergarments, head coverings, and body-concealing outer garments in ways that sought to eliminate any visible indication of female form or sexuality that might distract male observers or stimulate inappropriate desires within religious contexts. Lay dress codes imposed by religious authorities included detailed regulations governing Sunday clothing, festival garments, and appropriate attire for religious ceremonies, creating systems where participation in spiritual community required submission to clerical control over personal appearance and fashion choices. The Church developed elaborate procedures for investigating dress code violations, including requirements for public confession, penance rituals, and systematic surveillance of parishioners' clothing choices by religious officials who used sartorial compliance as evidence of spiritual devotion and political loyalty. Penalties for religious dress code violations ranged from public penance and spiritual counseling to excommunication and permanent banishment from Christian community, while the most serious violations could result in accusations of heresy, witchcraft, or demonic possession that carried risks of imprisonment, torture, or execution. The courtly fashion regulations in royal and noble households created elaborate systems of sartorial hierarchy that used clothing to reinforce political relationships while controlling access to visual symbols of power and authority that might challenge existing social arrangements or enable unauthorized claims to status and influence. Court dress codes typically included detailed specifications for different categories of courtiers, including requirements for specific fabrics, colors, ornaments, and accessories that immediately identified an individual's position within complex hierarchical systems that determined political access, social privileges, and economic opportunities. The Burgundian court under Philip the Good developed particularly elaborate dress codes that required different styles of clothing for different days of the week, seasons of the year, and types of court ceremonies, creating systems where perfect compliance required extensive wardrobes that only the wealthiest courtiers could afford, while serving as constant reminders of economic dependence on ducal favor. Women at court faced especially complex dress requirements that controlled necklines, sleeve styles, train lengths, and jewelry displays in ways that used female clothing as signals of political alliance, marriage availability, and family status, while providing opportunities for rivals to challenge each other through competitive displays of regulated luxury. The enforcement of court dress codes created elaborate systems of fashion surveillance, where courtiers monitored each other as clothing for violations that could be reported to authorities as evidence of political disloyalty, social presumption, or inappropriate ambition that threatened existing power relationships. Violations of court dress codes could result in exclusion from ceremonies, loss of political access, reduction of economic benefits, and, in extreme cases, banishment from court society that could destroy entire family fortunes, while serving as warnings to others about the consequences of sartorial rebellion. The competitive nature of court fashion created financial pressures that bankrupted many noble families who were required to maintain elaborate wardrobes while being prohibited from earning independent income, creating systems of economic dependence that reinforced political subordination through the weaponization of luxury consumption. The guild dress regulations imposed by craft and merchant organizations created comprehensive systems for controlling the clothing of working people while using sartorial restrictions to maintain economic hierarchies and prevent social mobility through the strategic denial of visual symbols associated with higher social status or political influence. Guild regulations typically included detailed provisions governing work clothing, ceremonial garments, and public dress for guild members, creating systems where professional identity was inseparable from sartorial compliance, while providing opportunities for rivals to challenge each other through accusations of dress code violations. Master craftsmen were typically permitted more elaborate clothing than journeymen or apprentices, creating visual hierarchies that reinforced economic relationships while using clothing restrictions to maintain authority structures within guild organizations. Women involved in guild activities through marriage or family relationships faced particularly restrictive dress codes that sought to prevent their clothing from suggesting independent economic activity or professional competence that might challenge male authority within craft and merchant communities. The enforcement of guild dress codes often intersected with municipal regulations and religious requirements, creating complex systems of overlapping authority where individuals could face multiple penalties for single violations while navigating competing demands from different institutional authorities. Violations of guild dress codes could result in professional sanctions, including loss of membership, exclusion from economic activities, confiscation of tools or inventory, and permanent banishment from craft communities that could destroy individual livelihoods while serving broader functions of social control. The economic impact of guild dress requirements often forced working families into debt or poverty, as they struggled to maintain appropriate clothing while meeting other financial obligations, creating systems where sartorial compliance became a form of economic taxation that benefited cloth merchants and fashion authorities at the expense of productive workers. The municipal dress laws enacted by city governments created urban systems of sartorial surveillance that sought to maintain public order while controlling the visual environment of commercial and residential areas through comprehensive regulations governing citizen appearance in public spaces. City dress codes typically included provisions governing prostitute identification clothing, beggar restrictions, merchant display regulations, and general public decency requirements that transformed urban streets into carefully regulated visual environments where clothing served as identification and social messaging systems. The famous Florentine sumptuary laws of the Renaissance period created elaborate systems for controlling female dress, including detailed specifications for necklines, sleeve decoration, jewelry display, and hair ornaments that sought to balance commercial interests in luxury trade with religious concerns about moral corruption and social disorder. Enforcement of municipal dress laws required extensive bureaucratic systems, including fashion inspectors, clothing assessors, and specialized courts for processing violations, creating urban employment opportunities for officials whose primary responsibility was monitoring and regulating citizen appearance in public spaces. The penalties for municipal dress violations typically included monetary fines scaled to encourage compliance while generating revenue for city governments, though persistent violators could face public humiliation, property confiscation, and exclusion from urban, commercial, and social activities. Municipal dress laws often created conflicts with guild regulations, religious requirements, and noble privileges, generating complex legal disputes that revealed the competing interests and overlapping authorities that sought to control citizen appearance for different political and economic purposes. The gendered nature of dress control reveals how sartorial regulations served as comprehensive systems for maintaining patriarchal authority through the systematic control of female appearance, sexuality, and social messaging, while creating different standards for male and female clothing that reinforced gender hierarchies and sexual subordination. Women faced exponentially more restrictive dress codes than men across all social institutions, with detailed regulations governing undergarments, body coverage, color choices, and ornamental displays that sought to control male sexual desire while preventing women from using clothing as tools of social advancement or political influence. The obsession with female necklines, sleeve coverage, and skirt lengths in dress codes reveals the extent to which authorities understood clothing as a primary mechanism for controlling sexual desire and maintaining male authority over female bodies and social presence. Married women typically faced different dress requirements than unmarried women, creating sartorial systems that immediately identified marital status while communicating sexual availability and social position in ways that served male interests in controlling female sexuality and reproductive capacity. Women who violated dress codes faced gender-specific punishments, including public shaming rituals, forced clothing modifications, and social ostracism that were designed to reinforce feminine submission while providing entertainment for male audiences who participated in the systematic humiliation of non-compliant women. The economic impact of gendered dress regulations often forced women into financial dependence on male relatives who controlled access to appropriate clothing, while using sartorial compliance as evidence of feminine virtue and family respectability. The resistance and evasion strategies developed by individuals and communities subjected to oppressive dress codes demonstrate human creativity in preserving personal autonomy and cultural identity, while avoiding the severe penalties associated with direct violation of sartorial regulations imposed by religious, political, and economic authorities. Citizens developed elaborate techniques for disguising prohibited clothing, including removable ornaments, reversible garments, hidden layers, and clothing modifications that could be quickly altered to achieve compliance during official inspections, while maintaining desired appearances during normal social interaction. Some communities developed collective resistance strategies, including group purchases of compliant clothing that could be shared among families, community funds to pay dress code fines, and systematic non-cooperation with enforcement officials that required military intervention to suppress. Underground markets emerged for prohibited clothing items, including illegal fabrics, forbidden colors, and restricted ornaments that were traded through networks that operated similarly to other forms of contraband commerce, while serving the persistent human desire for personal expression and social distinction. Wealthy individuals often circumvented dress codes through legal technicalities, including foreign citizenship claims, religious exemptions, and professional privileges that allowed them to wear prohibited clothing while maintaining the fiction of compliance with regulations that were primarily enforced against lower social classes. The economic functions of dress code enforcement reveal how sartorial regulations served primarily to benefit textile merchants, fashion authorities, and enforcement bureaucracies, rather than genuine social or moral purposes, creating systems of economic exploitation disguised as moral instruction and social order. Dress codes created captive markets for approved clothing while eliminating competition from alternative fashion choices, generating substantial profits for merchants and manufacturers who influenced the creation and enforcement of regulations that served their commercial interests. The fines and penalties associated with dress code violations provided significant revenue streams for religious institutions, municipal governments, and court systems that had financial incentives to maintain and expand sartorial regulations regardless of their social utility or moral justification. The bureaucratic systems required for dress code enforcement created employment opportunities for inspectors, assessors, and enforcement officials who developed professional interests in maintaining complex regulatory systems that justified their positions while generating ongoing revenue through penalty collection. The modern legacy of historical dress codes can be seen in contemporary fashion regulations, workplace clothing requirements, school uniform policies, and social expectations about appropriate dress that continue to serve functions of social control and status reinforcement, while claiming moral authority for restrictions that primarily benefit institutional power rather than individual welfare. Understanding the historical functions of dress codes provides crucial insight into contemporary debates about clothing regulations in schools, workplaces, and public spaces that often reproduce historical patterns of gender discrimination, class reinforcement, and institutional control disguised as moral instruction or social necessity. The psychological impact of living under comprehensive dress regulations created populations that internalized surveillance and self-censorship while developing complex relationships with personal appearance that served authority rather than individual expression, revealing patterns that continue to influence contemporary attitudes toward fashion, sexuality, and social conformity. As you contemplate these historical systems that transformed clothing from personal expression into comprehensive social control while using the regulation of desire as a tool for maintaining political and economic hierarchies. Consider how contemporary dress codes and fashion expectations continue to serve similar functions of surveillance control and status reinforcement. The medieval and early modern experience with sartorial regulation demonstrates that the control of human appearance has always served institutional interests in maintaining authority and preventing social mobility rather than genuine moral instruction or social welfare revealing patterns that require ongoing vigilance and resistance. If this exploration of history's most invasive systems of sartorial control has revealed patterns of institutional surveillance and social manipulation that extend beyond historical dress codes into contemporary regulations of personal appearance and expression, share your insights. Subscribe for more investigations into the mechanisms of social control disguised as moral instruction. And remember that understanding historical precedents provides essential knowledge for recognizing and resisting contemporary forms of institutional authority that seek to control human desire and personal expression through the regulation of appearance and fashion choice. Would you have recognized the political and economic functions behind historical dress codes while living under their comprehensive regulation of personal appearance, or would you have accepted sartorial restrictions as legitimate moral instruction rather than systematic tools for maintaining institutional power through the control of human desire and social expression?